have trustees, community members, faculty, students, staff, everybody in the room for what I'm sure is going to be an absolutely fascinating talk. So our guest speaker for today is Kristen Averyt, like favorite, from DRI. She's the 8th president of the Desert Research Institute, and we're very, very happy she brought along a colleague, the vice president for research, and that's Dr. Lawrence Bouja, like Beaujolais. So we're very, very happy to have you both in the audience today. And Sierra Nevada College has had a long and fruitful friendship with DRI. And as I look out at the audience, I know that the reason for that is some of the faces in this crowd. We have current members of the board of DRI, and we have former acting presidents of DRI that started as the head of environmental and atmospheric research. We have faculty members who did their doctoral research working in collaboration with DRI. So our friendships and our connections with DRI go way, way back. And I think that's for a couple of reasons. First of all, we're just extremely proud to have a neighbor like DRI in Northern Nevada. Their emphasis on scientific excellence and also on innovation in the world is so impressive to us, and we feel like we're in good company when we're around them. But also, we're very excited to share their concern about sustainability. And at SNC, we really think that sustainability happens at the intersection between science and society and economic viability. And one of the reasons that I'm so excited to have Dr. Averyt here today is she has a passion for this intersection between society and science. And so I'm going to give you the edited highlights of her incredibly impressive career, but I encourage you to go read this for yourself because I'm sure I'll miss something really important. So she comes to DRI from Colorado, and at Colorado she was the Associate Director for Science for the Cooperative Institute for Research in Environmental Sciences, which was a collaboration between NOAA and the university. When she started her education, she was at the University of Miami, where she did her degrees in marine science and chemistry. And after finishing that, she got a Fulbright scholarship that took her to New Zealand, where she studied freshwater lakes in New Zealand, and did, I believe, your Master of Science in inorganic chemistry while you were in New Zealand. So she came back to the United States, and she began working on her PhD at Stanford in the Geological and Environmental Science Department, and she changed her emphasis in terms of her science and began looking at climate and ocean chemistry. And while she was there, she built a model, a geochemical proxy, which she would have to explain to you, I certainly can't, that allowed her to reconstruct ocean chemistry over significant events during a 120 million year period. So to me that sounds like a fantastic and fascinating intersection between science, between history, and between social environmental change. When she started working in her graduate program, she also had the opportunity to pursue a number of different fellowship opportunities, and she sat on the Polar Research Board in Washington, D.C., where she says she found her real interest in the connection between science and society. She then finished her PhD and then got a Sea Grant Fellowship, which brought her back to Washington and to the US Senate, where she continued to work on policy and science. And so we're very, very proud of this next accomplishment. I'm super impressed by it, which is that as part of the working group for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, as a member of a team of scientists, she was actually awarded a Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. She said before we started, I was one of a lot of people. Well, I can guarantee that most of us in the room will never be one of a lot of people to win a Nobel Prize. So it's impressive and it's fascinating. She still continues to work on climate change on both the national and regional scale, including being the lead author for the 3rd U.S. Climatological Assessment. And I'm just really looking forward to what she has to share with us today. Dr. Averyt.
Thank you. It's always entertaining sometimes to listen to your CV being presented to a group of folks, but I have to say thank you so much for the kind words. And one of the things that's really drives my career is seeing that connection, as you emphasize so well, between not just science and policy, but really science and society. You know, I was struggling a little bit about what you all might be interested in and what I could share with all of you today. So what I thought I'd do is talk about DRI through the lens of connecting science with society. So let me start with a little context. I'm going to ask you guys a couple questions. So, out of everybody, okay, so first of all, everybody in this room, raise your hand if you're a job or if you're a student studying a STEM subject, science, technology, education, mathematics. All right, that's pretty good. What percentage, throw out your numbers, do you think of the entire US workforce are actually employed in a STEM subject? Guesstimates, throw something out there for me.
20%.
20? 30? What do we have back there? 10? You're getting closer at 10.
2%.
8.
6.
5.
6%, you're the winner. So only 6%, and this is based off data just from the US Bureau of Labor and Statistics that came out a couple months ago. Only 6% of our entire workforce, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So not a lot of people know a scientist, right? So next statistic. What percentage of Americans do you think are able to name a living scientist? Doesn't have to be you know, an actual individual, but a type of scientist. I mean, what number do you think? 15?
Less than
2.
1%.
2, 1? Oh, you're killing me here. I mean,
30%.
okay, so it's about 30%. Okay? A living scientist. Exactly. I'm a living scientist. You guys all know me now, so now you can say you know a living scientist, right? Now here's something else that I find very interesting. What do you think is the one scientist, either type of scientist or person, that most folks associate or call the living scientist that they know? Living. Think of living scientists. A name, a type? Who do you think they associate science with? What was that?
Stephen Hawking.
Stephen Hawking. I know, I was going to say, we're a couple weeks too late. No, actually, so, believe it or not, your local TV meteorologist, that is the top person that most people connect with as a scientist and a living scientist that they know. It could be Al Roker, it could be your local person, it could be Cassie Wilson, who I watch just down the hill. But so what I think is really interesting and also sobering about what I just shared. First of all, we don't have a lot of people that are actually formally educated in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We're not doing a good job clearly talking to people about what we do, even in the most basic sense. And we're really not connecting beyond the TV meteorology community with science and what matters with people. Now, I could show you a lot more statistics that would support the statements that I just made. But what I want to do is I want to talk more about DRI in particular and why these statistics and the role between science and society are so important, and why they're important not just about where DRI has been, but where we're going. Because I think DRI is a microcosm and representative of what's happening in the science community. And it's really important, more than ever, that we reconnect science with our society. And why do I think this is important? These are 3 statements that I hear repeatedly. I've been at DRI 9 months now. Repeatedly about this are my great institution. I have the pleasure of leading. We're the best kept secret within the state of Nevada. We're a hidden gem in the Nevada system of higher education. And we're unsung heroes of environmental science and sustainability. They're meant as compliments, but you know what? I'm really tired of having science being a secret. Because by my institution being a secret or being characterized this way, it's inherent that it's implicit that our scientific story is not being told. And this is not just unique to DRI, this is unique across the scientific enterprise. I think science, I've heard it characterized as science is undergoing an existential crisis. I like to think about it as a renaissance. We're really trying to rethink about where we fit within society and really trying to reconnect. So let me tell you a little bit about DRI and who we are right now. We're roughly 400 scientists. About a quarter of our folks actually have PhDs. We represent over 40 different scientific disciplines. We have multiple labs, and we're actually a statewide institution. We have a campus in Reno. We also have one down on Flamingo, just off the strip in the south. About 2/3 of our scientists are up here in northern Nevada and a third down south. Last year, we brought in about $31 million in sponsored projects. Our annual expenditures are about $55 million a year. And we're actually one of the 8 institutions within the Nevada system of higher education. This is really important because DRI is unique. We are the only research institute that is non-degree granting, that is part of a system of higher education that is independent from a specific university. This makes us very special, very unique for multiple reasons. Now, we do research all over the world. We have right now, 300 active projects on all 7 continents. And I'll go into some more detail about what we're doing, but if you look at the general themes, these really are focused on some of the issues that we really share and the values that we really share with Sierra Nevada College, as well as the partner institutions like UC Davis and University of Nevada, Reno. We work on issues like wildfire, water, extreme environments, air quality, and of course, the climate and sustainable resources. Now, our basic research, really the core of our research, is really founded on understanding our air, water, earth, and ecosystem resources. That's really our bread and butter. That's what we built our reputation on. But what we're doing now in the institution, and one of the things that we're trying to bring to the forefront, are some of the unique things that we're doing and the areas where we can have significant growth. We actually have, for example, a very strong cybersecurity team. We have one of Wired Magazine's top 10 cybersecurity experts in the country who runs our research computing at DRI, all right? As somebody put it to me, we're the biggest little research institute in the world. I was like, oh, where did we get that from? We're also doing a really unique things, and this is where I think science is very important with science. We can't just stay in our swim lanes. We need to connect with different people and unique people if we're going to address some of the challenges that we're faced with. So we're connecting with health issues, for example. And we're doing quite a bit with natural hazards and extreme event forecasting. And again, I'll get into some detail on this later. Now, one of the things that I'm very proud of, and one of our significant metrics, and a big metric for academia, are your National Science Foundation rankings. And our rankings in environmental sciences, that is atmospheric and earth science research, we're number 24 and 23. 23, this is basically federal dollars of expenditures. The top is our total expenditures. That puts us within spitting distance of being in the top 5 of environmental research institutions across the entire country. So, yeah, I gotta say, I love UC Davis, but I kind of like just being just a little bit up there, you know. But, you know, this doesn't really mean a lot outside of academia. Everybody's like, oh, what are your NSF rankings? Where are you? Where do you sit on that list? What really matters, and this is where the societal connection comes in, is talking about what our impact is. And this is what we do a terrible job of as scientists. So, another story about DRI. I hear all the time, if somebody does know DRI, yeah, DRI is great, they're fantastic. I'm like, oh great, what do you love about it? I don't know, but you're great. And this is part of it. So even people that we're talking about science with can't connect with exactly what the scientists are doing. And this is something that we're dealing with in our institution. Now, what I also find interesting, this is actually language from the founding legislation that established DRI 59 years ago. DRI is created to promote the general welfare of the state of Nevada and its citizens through the development of educational and scientific research. There's nothing about NSF rankings in here. It's about people, and it's about the welfare of the state. And that, to me, is what we need to get back to in science in terms of connecting with people. It's about getting back to why we do it. It's not just about metrics. Granted, we all love metrics, and we love dollars in the door. But I do believe that we can go back to this. It will help us with connecting with society. So what I want to do is I want to tell you guys, go through basically a list and tell you some really little vignettes about some of the research we're doing and why it actually matters. And what I hope is that everybody here will leave with something of, wow, I didn't know DRI did that, and that's pretty cool, and it matters to me. So let's start at home. Let's talk about Lake Tahoe. So yes, believe it or not, Desert Research Institute has a boat, and it's a research vehicle, an RV, on a research vessel, on Lake Tahoe. We've actually been conducting research in partnership with University of Nevada, Reno, SNC, as well as Davis, for over 40 years. We've been a part of that large consortium. We do work on air quality as well as water quality. We helped to form the first stormwater improvement plans for the lake. We actually do the air quality monitoring and the alerts when there's, for example, prescribed burns in the area or there's natural wildfires. So we're the group that does all the air quality. We also do assessments of what the land cover is like. So if we're building and there's some impervious, basically cement that we're putting up somewhere, what's that going to do to the lake? How's that going to change the drainage? So we're really doing things that connect with Tahoe along with all of our partners here. And we all know, for everybody that lives here, that these issues are very important to what we love about the lake. Something else, and I like telling this story, quagga mussels. Anybody here not heard of quagga mussels? All right, good. I'm glad I don't need to go there. So you guys probably already know quagga mussels have infiltrated the Colorado River network, and they're at Lake Mead. Our researchers in the south are they've actually figured out a way that they can slow down the reproduction of quagga mussels naturally, so, rather than dumping chemicals into the environment. And that's something that will help us to keep the quagga mussels out of Lake Tahoe and our other native waters. That's another example of what we're doing and how what we're doing in one part of our institution connects with the other part. Something also near and dear to our hearts, mountain snowpack and western water supplies. This is actually a picture of our Storm Peak laboratory, which actually sits right on the slopes of Steamboat Springs in Colorado. It's the highest observational laboratory of snowpack in the country, and yeah, it sits in Colorado, believe it or not. But we have a great partnership of studying the Rocky Mountains and the Sierra Nevadas and looking at what the water supply looks like. Because our water supply doesn't just come from the Sierras in the state of Nevada. The Colorado Rockies are equally important. One of our biggest hits lately has been quote-unquote snow drought. Has anybody heard of that in the news lately? Right. So what this is essentially we're getting just as much precipitation, but the percentage of precipitation that we're getting falling as snow is declining relative to what's happening as rain. And we all know nobody wants to go skiing if it's raining up at Squaw. No, that's just not going to happen. But this is a trend that we're seeing, and we're the group that is actually, our team is actually doing all the monitoring, and this is helping with our forecasting, and we're working with water managers and their planning regimes. We also do quite a bit preparing for natural hazards and atmospheric river events. That's when tropical moisture comes up, it drains, and it basically decides it's going to aim right for some part of the Sierras. We do a lot of work on that, and with the projections with the Weather Service about where it's going to snow, where it's going to rain, where it's going to flood, and where we're going to have mudslides. Now, a lot of the work that I've just talked about is actually part of a broader enterprise within Desert Research Institute called the Western Regional Climate Center. This is one of only six national RCCs that are funded by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration across the U.S. And their whole mission is to connect with people on the ground who do work that is really important related to drought, where they can be impacted by drought, wildfire, and floods, and other climatological events. This group, they're not just showing up and talking to farmers, they have long-term relationships working with farmers and working with people and boots on the ground to try and develop the best solutions possible to help them with their decision making. The analog that I think it's scientists, we're really bad about saying, there's a problem over there, I'm gonna go back to my laboratory, I'm gonna come up with a solution, and then I'm gonna hand it off. To me, that's like saying, okay, I'm going to go to Macy's and I'm going to go buy a suit. Well, the suit might be okay, right? But what we're trying to do and where science is more effective, it's the analog of, no, I'm going to go to a tailor, and the tailor's going to ask me, what do you want? I'm going to say, well, I want this, and maybe we can move this, and maybe we can do this. And in the end, I'm going to get a better product, it's going to last longer, and it's going to be more useful. That is what this group does, and it ends up with better science that's more important and more impactful. And something that I think you all might be interested in if you haven't seen it already, they have a very nice dashboard that compiles all the weather and climate information across the broader Tahoe Basin at tahoeclimb.dri.edu. This is what I look at when I'm thinking about where I'm going to go skiing. Something else, I talked about staying in your swim lanes in physical sciences and in general just keep on doing what you're doing. This is a really interesting project about wildfire behavior because it brought in the social scientist community. We actually have social scientists at DRI. And what we did was we had some folks who went out and interviewed the firefighters that were working on the front lines of some of the mega fires that hit the West in the 2013-2014 time period. We went out, because you hear people talk about fire like, that fire did something really strange, or there are these stories that you hear. So they collected over 400 stories from firefighters about extreme fire events that they found, and what they compared it with what physically happened. And what they found is that the firefighters were actually able to articulate the weirdness of fire behavior, and it mapped to what was actually happening physically. And what was important about that is that the firefighters, they actually, essentially, they're an early warning system in and of itself, because what their sense was telling them, their intuition, that was a precursor to when we saw the physical indicators of problematic fires that can compromise human safety and property. Another example, and I'm sticking with some of these climate examples, this is something called Climate Engine, and it's brand new. It's a partnership that we've had with University of Idaho and Google. This is a data visualization product, and it allows us to use satellite data, weather data, and a whole bunch of climate data to look at any spatial resolution or at any temporal resolution that we could possibly want to help inform a decision. What's really cool about this, and what's different about this is going out of our swim lanes. This is a partnership with Google. Google actually donated 1 petabyte of cloud storage and 50 million processing hours. And what this has allowed us to do is to have on-demand information and mapping tools that overcome the computational limits of big data. You know, when you talk about big data, you go out, you churn a machine, a computer spits out information in a month. In this, we can do it in a matter of minutes. And so this is a fantastic partnership, and we're working with the big mining corporations, the big ski resorts, and a whole bunch of folks internationally to develop this tool. Again, this is making information, not just collecting the information, it's making it useful. But we don't just work in the US, we work globally. One of our biggest projects is WASH. This is the Water Sanitation Hygiene Project, or the global part of DRI's Global Water Initiative. And this is in sub-Saharan Africa. And this project is all about bringing clean water to the communities that don't have them. It's water that we take for granted. We just got another $5 million grant from USAID that's focused on girls, because one of the biggest problems that they have in terms of their educational system is that when girls hit puberty, they leave because there's no access to clean water and what, honestly, a young woman needs access to when she's in school during that time of her life. And so this is something that we're going to be able to move the needle on access to water and hopefully keep girls in school. But then we're not just in Africa. We also do work at the poles. I really love, this is Joe McConnell. I would argue he's one of our most prominent scientists at the institution. And he does work in the Antarctic and the Arctic, specifically Greenland. And this is Monica. She works in his laboratory. And this specific ice core is 200,000 years old. And it was pulled out of Greenland. And what happens is when ice freezes, it captures air bubbles in it. And it captures the air that was in the atmosphere around the ice when the ice formed. So the air bubbles that are in these ice cores are 200,000 years old. And what they do in their laboratory is they melt those ice cores slowly, and they're able to analyze what the atmosphere actually looked like at that period in time. So when they're melting the core, it's so cool because you can see the increases in CO2 as the Industrial Revolution hits. You can see spikes in other atmospheric constituents when there's big volcanic eruptions. It's absolutely fascinating. And the reason that we do this is not just because it's very cool, to be honest, but also because we really want to understand what happened in the past with climate, and this will help us to connect and understand more about what's happening in the future. Because my mom was a history teacher. Those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. Well, the same applies in the physical sciences. We also do work in our other extreme environments. This is one of our former graduate student, I should say. She finished her PhD. And she's doing work in one of the deepest mines in the US. It's over a mile underground in North Dakota, looking for extreme life. You're looking for little microbes. Now, why on earth would we do this? Well, because it's not just on earth, to be blunt. If we can understand why little microbes might live here in these really weird environments and they're not found anywhere else, it can help us to develop the detectors that we will deploy onto missions to other planets and other moons to look for life. So right now, we actually have several laboratories that look at microbes in extreme environments. And we have one woman in her laboratory. She's developing the instrumentation to detect microbial life for the next NASA mission that I believe is going to Europa. So yeah, Desert Research Institute. We're much more than the desert. In fact, apparently we're going to other planets too. I really like this story because it's about pupfish, and I think the pupfish are pretty amazing. There's only roughly 100 of these little guys left in the world, and they only live in one place, and that's Devil's Hole down in southern Nevada. Devil's Hole, the water is about 93 degrees Fahrenheit. Your hot tubs are at about 100, 101, 104 if you're like me. So that gives you an idea about what the temperature is. And that water is also extremely acidic. And what's amazing about these little suckers is that they have evolved to be able to through dramatic swings in water temperatures and pH changes. So they're incredibly robust. So they've been able, again, they have in their genetic makeup, they've been able to evolve. The reason that we study this species is because we believe that they're essentially the canary in the coal mine for climate change. Because if climate change is moving too quickly and the temperatures increase too quickly and these little guys' evolutionary genes can't keep up with the pace, then we might have a problem. And it helps us to also understand, by looking at their genetic makeup and how they can survive, what other species may be at risk for significant changes in climatic regimes. So the pupfish, they're kind of cool, they're pretty cute, they're very unique, but they're incredibly important, and not just for the state of Nevada, but they're actually important globally as what we characterize as an indicator species. Well, we also do a lot, actually our largest contracts at DRI are actually with the military and with the Department of Defense. One, I can't talk too much about this project, but I really like this project because it's about keeping our folks safe and our military safe. And believe it or not, if you're going to be deploying military assets anywhere, even if it's in the US, they need to understand, have high resolution information about the weather. And it's not just the weather per se. They need details about air quality. Like, is there dust in the air? How much? Is it going to impede how my machinery or my instrumentation is working? Am I actually going to be able to see what's going to be happening? They need to understand what the soil moisture is. They need to understand if there's more wind that's going to be coming, will the wind be picking up? Will it be changing? What's going to be happening? And they rely on us at DRI to provide that information for them globally. And that's all I can say about that project. We also do work with the Department of Energy, and this is an ongoing partnership similar to the work we've done with Lake Tahoe. In the South, we have been doing all the monitoring at the Nevada Test Site, which is now called the Nevada National Security Site. And for those of you who haven't flown over, haven't seen it, when they were doing the testing of the underground and above ground testing of the bombs down in the South, these holes are all from when their little explosions. So we do all the work on the test site and the environmental monitoring, and little explosions. But in addition to that, we also do all the archiving of the assets that come out of the test site. We also have a whole team of archaeologists that are working at the test site. And we actually, our facility in the South, we host the National Atomic Testing Museum, which is part of the Smithsonian. So we have a really robust and rich history in Southern Nevada of protecting our state, if you will, and making sure that what happened there and what might happen in the future with respect to Department of Energy, that we're protecting our citizenry. Yeah, I like this because everybody loves drones, right? I mean, they're kind of fun. They're pretty exciting. I actually have this one. It's about this big around, and it sits in my office up in Reno, and they won't let me take it for a drive, but it's pretty neat, I have to admit. But you know, drones are not something that we're just doing now. In fact, we've actually been deploying drones at DRI for over 20 years. This is something that we've been doing for a while. And I think this really speaks to our innovation. We're leading the state in terms of what we're doing with drone technology, and we're working very closely with the Governor's Office of Economic Development with their drone program and autonomous vehicles. And we're doing some pretty amazing things, particularly with wildfire risk assessment and understanding how wildfires propagate. I mentioned the climate engine. We actually have one of only a handful of 6-sided virtual reality immersion facilities up in Reno. And we've partnered with the Museum of Art to use it. We've partnered with all sorts of different people, architecture, etc., because there's this full immersive experience to really understand what's happening. And this is something that we're really looking to deploy to do more with. In terms of future directions, I don't know has anybody heard of this partnership? Did anybody hear about about this?
Yes.
Okay, all right, there we go. So what happened, we have a huge partnership among Renown, Helix, and DRI, which is about connecting public health, environmental information, and genetic information. And this is a one-of-a-kind research project. And a year ago, we launched it with 23andMe, and we gave out 10,000 kits for free to the population in northern Nevada. Those kits were gone in 48 hours. And just 2 weeks ago, we launched phase 2 with a new partner, Helix, and we now have 40,000 kits available. I believe we've already have 20,000 kits that have already been spoken for, if you will. But I would encourage you, if you're interested, to participate in this. And the information, what we're learning from this, is pretty profound. It's a longitudinal study, so we won't see the best and the most impressive results for probably 5 to 8 years. But for example, one thing that we learned, when there's major wildfire events, the air quality, once it hits a particular threshold, visits to the emergency room, not just for asthma, but for cardiac issues, more than doubles. So this is something that could be used, for example, you can imagine as a renowned patient, you could get a text on your phone. The air quality has hit this level. You have a predisposition to this. We would advise you to perhaps not go outside today. So there are things that we can do to really help promote public health that really tie into the environment and what we do really well and really underpin DRI. This is about, again, connecting with unique partners. I will say, this makes a lot of people at DRI nervous. Scientists and researchers in general are well, I should go to the federal government. The federal government gives me a grant. I go off and I do my research. But again, if we're connecting with what people care about, we really need to move the needle on this. So people need to understand science, and we really need to prove our value. And I do believe that public-private partnerships are incredibly important, particularly in something like this. Along those same lines, I'm sure most of you know Roger Wittenberg, and Roger is the new chairman of our board at Desert Research Institute. And he has really been phenomenal in helping us to move forward and promote our Desert Research Corporation. This is the commercialization arm of DRI, and I'm proud to say that in the last 6 months we've spun off our very first corporations off intellectual property developed within DRI. The first one is called 2Biomics, and where I can't go into detail about this right now, but suffice it to say, we're extracting natural fungicides from microbial communities to combat pests and certain diseases that could plague agricultural crops. It's a natural way to combat issues as opposed to using chemicals. So this is the kind of thing that sits on a shelf or is being done in a laboratory, and it takes bringing new people in, people with different experiences, people like Roger, people who know business, and see other, to be able to say, wow, this can be applied in a different light. And I think we need more of this across science to really be able to connect across different parts of society. And then I would be remiss if I didn't talk about education. We don't grant degrees at DRI yet, but we play an important role in education. The graduate students that come to DRI to do their research, by and large, they get their PhDs or their masters from UNR and from UNLV, but they come to DRI to work with DRI researchers. And UNR and UNLV, by the most part, wouldn't get those graduate students otherwise. This is where being a part of the Nevada system of higher education is incredibly important. Similarly, we have a lot, for those who are interested, a lot of internship opportunities. We have high schoolers working on both of our campuses, community college, state college, and university students. We're always developing and looking for new opportunities to engage students in research, and for multiple reasons. And then we also have a very robust K-12 STEM program, and I would actually say STEAM program because we have a large partnership with the Nevada Museum of Art as well. And I'll have a big announcement coming up about that at some point. And I want to highlight that really quickly. This is our Science Alive program, formerly known as Green Boxes. I think folks around here, if you've been to any of the science fairs or anything, you've probably heard about this. What this is, this offers teachers free lesson plans, supplies, and training on over 40 different topics related to STEM across the state of Nevada. And it's literally a big old green suitcase. And we ship these off, they get to use them, and then they send them back. Again, this is free. And it's not that we're just sending this off and putting this in the hands of teachers. We're teaching the teachers how to teach about science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. What I'm particularly proud of, as of today, we've reached roughly 20,000 students across the state of Nevada. And of those, 44% Hispanic, 15% African American, and 55% low income. I wish I had those sort of statistics in terms of the makeup of the scientific faculty that I have at DRI. Because when it comes to science, we need more people at the table because we have a big job ahead of us, folks. But I will also say, the other thing that's important about this in science education, I'm not trying to make everybody a scientific researcher. No, I'm not. scientific literacy is just as, and even if not more important. So I want to see, even if that 6% of the workforce stays at 6% of the workforce is formally trained in STEM, that 30% that knows a scientist, I want to see that at 100%. I want to see society really be able to connect with what's important about science, what we do, and recognize the value. And once again, come to trust science. Because it really troubles me what I'm seeing happening in the national dialogue with certain populations about a lack of trust and really just a general understanding about the scientific process and what we do. So we need to do more, and we really need to talk about it. So the lessons that I think, and where I think DRI will be going in the future, and what we need to do better, this is also what I think needs to be happening in general across all scientific communities. We need to bolster, we can't lose our core, you know, the inquiry of, and the fascination of, wow, I'm going to look at something or see something for the first time. What gets kids, it gets me, I'm still really excited about it. We can't lose our core research capabilities. But we need to start connecting across disciplines. Again, moving out of our swim lanes a little bit. Engage with non-traditional partners and not be afraid of it. We need to take that entrepreneurial attitude of, you know what, let's take a risk and let's see what happens. I think we also need to enhance our community engagement and not be afraid to talk about science with people. And not just, here's my science and I'm going to walk away, or I'm just going to publish it in journals and get my NSF rankings up. It's more than that. It's a lot more than that. I also believe we need to expand our educational enterprise. You know, what we're doing at DRI, I'm so proud, but I want to see us do it bigger and better. Because again, it's about conveying what we're doing, why it's important, and why people should care. If you go do a fine arts degree, that is awesome. But I really hope at some point you're like, you know what, that science is still important. So with that, I'd like to thank you, and thanks for coming. If there are any questions? Other questions? Vanessa.
You mentioned some data that you were collecting in cooperation with Peak and with the Renowned Health regarding wildfires and responses in the community to that. Do you also track that information with prescribed birds?
I believe that they are doing, I believe that is something that we could track. I can't specifically speak to all the details of what's being collected, but I would imagine those data are in the larger data set. The project is a big data project where we're using machine learning and data analytics. I imagine that would be something that they would be able to pull out.
Do you suppose that will ever be made available to the public or users?
I can always ask. I'd be happy to take your information and pass it off to the team that does the work. How about that? Yes?
It seems like you guys are doing a lot to educate the public, the young students, et cetera, as the public at large. Given the issues with climate change today, and the apparent apathy or even disbelief of the issue in many of our political levels, is there any arm of DRI that is moving toward educating, or whatever word you want to use, those people to elevate this as an issue?
Well, I would say we are not a political, we don't take policy standpoints at the institution. We're all about the science and the objectivity. If there's anything that we promote, it's science, just period. I will say that we do a lot of work engaging with the community. When I talked about the WRCC, for example, you know, they talk with people about what they care about, what their values are, and get them to be engaged in the dialogue around climate. And so once you start talking to somebody, say, about drought or floods, and they can connect on that, then you can kind of move the dialogue forward about, okay, well, how would you plan for a future drought that might be more extreme or longer, or where there's less water in a reservoir, or a flood that might be more extreme. And I think by just my personal philosophy is if you just walk into a room and say, well, climate change is the most important thing in the whole world, and we need to be focused on this, you're really missing the point. Because that might be the most important thing to me, or it might be the most important thing to the other. But there are other people who are like, you know what, economic development is really important to me. Or this is really important to me. Or paying the bills, or keeping the lights on, or putting food on my table is really important. So for me, when we're talking with the client, it's a dialogue. It's not just, here's why this is really important and hitting people over the head with it. It's about engaging in that dialogue and finding those connections. Because, for example, economic development and climate change, there is a marriage there. There's a lot of opportunity there on both sides. With climate and poverty, there are opportunities. But I think one has to be appreciative of what somebody else's values might be and what might be the most important thing to do. So the answer is no, we don't have anybody actively working on the climate change thing, But this is something that we do, our climate scientists do, just by the nature of how they interact with others in the community and how they interact with stakeholders. Yes?
Do you do any work at the nuclear waste depository site?
We have historically done work at Yucca Mountain, yes. We actually have a long history with the state of Nevada and with the Department of Energy of providing objective information when there have been inquiries about, for example, seismicity, about impacts to the water table, etc. So we have been what I would characterize as the honest broker of information with questions related to the repository, to the test site, and really the broader suite of Department of Energy assets across the state and really the West. Yes?
I think the biggest thing that I'm taking away from your presentation is maybe scientists need to talk to more people on a regular level. But, for me studying science, when I go to work, people don't want to hear what I have to say.
Yeah.
Or they don't care, which I think is a lot of problems that we face.
Yeah.
How do you make it a normal subject? Like, how do you talk to people about science?
That's a really great question, and I think that's part of the struggle, and I don't have the perfect answer. I think there's, I'm lucky. I get opportunities like this to talk about science and show my passion for the institution and all the great things they're doing. But it's hard to bring it up in day-to-day conversation, right? But I do think, in general, you always ask, oh, what do you do? Oh, yeah, you're the former president of SNC. That's great. All right, let's talk about these. So, you have these long sort of dialogues, and you create these relationships. And I think over time, you can tackle those conversations. I think about it as like the ugly dress question. When you first meet somebody, I can be like, oh, do you like what? And they're like, oh, you look great. It's great. But then once you become really good friends, you're like, nope, take it off. That looks awful. And I think in these kind of trusted relationships about climate and in science in general, and particularly issues that are polarizing, like hydraulic fracturing, like climate change, like Yucca Mountain, like climate, and there's so many. We have to be careful about how we enter into those discussions. Just like, the topics you don't talk about at dinner with family sometimes, the same sort of applies for science. Yes?
Are you doing any research into infectious diseases?
So we are as part of the IHI, this Institute for Health Innovation partnership with Renown. We are starting to get more into the clinical space through partnerships with Renown and with their clinical researchers. We don't have any specific folks that are doing the research themselves, but we do work with partners. For example, partnerships around implications for spread of infectious disease related to climate and what risks might be. So it's external sort of partnerships, but we don't, to my knowledge, have anybody internally actively working as the expert.
Thank you.
Of course. Yes?
At one time, I thought there was a project underway to take extensive core samplings of the undisturbed bed of Lake Tahoe in order to find out what it tells us. Is that funded? Is it ongoing? Has some of it been done?
I've heard a little bit about this in the past, and I don't believe it's happening right now. I'm not fully versed in all of that, but I think if it was active right now, I would know about it. But my vice president for research would be really happy to look into it.
I knew you were here. It should be fascinating.
Yes.
How are you?
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
How are you engaging school children to take little fellowships for summer research and things like that?
Right. So our Green Boxes program, again, has been incredibly popular, in terms of engaging kids in science and technology. One of the things that I'm trying to work on, and this kind of goes to the point that you made over there about science and connecting with people, I really want to move, it's not always in scientists' comfort zone to go talk to kindergartners, for example, about science, but I think it can be good for us to move outside of our comfort zone. So we're trying to get more of our researchers and scientists into the classrooms, into the K through 12 classrooms, to talk about what they do in detail and to really connect with some of our researchers. That isn't necessarily a formalized program like our Green Boxes, but in some cases, our Green Boxes do feature individual researchers, and we have the opportunity to bring the researcher into the classroom after the lessons. So, yeah.
One of Dr. Averyt's first initiatives was to open up an Office of Education.
Oh, yeah.
To really get, we survived by soft funding. And there wasn't a funding line that could actually support us to do this, and that's changing. So we're
That's
opening big doors there.
Yeah, I just got an Office of Education approved by the Regents, which was a big deal. So yes, thank you, Lauren, for reminding me.
Warren.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, thank you.
I had one last question, and I appreciate all the information you provided us on DRI, was when I was head of atmospheric sciences. The most important thing I think you said was that we're not political. We try and be scientists.
Absolutely.
And we used to emphasize to the scientists, please don't just go in with groupthink or preconceived notions. Do your analysis, report your findings, and let that fall wherever it may.
Right.
And if more people would, observe those principles instead of just going off in hysteria about a lot of things, we'd be better off. But DRIs really, really serve an important function, that especially for the legislature, which
Absolutely.
doesn't always have a very sound appreciation of the science. And so, it's an enormously important portion of the system. So, hats off to you. Thanks.
You guys,
Thank you, yes.
Margaret and then Robert, and then maybe we'll take one after that.
Okay, Margaret.
I just have a thought. I know there are a number of science programs in the summer for
Yeah.
the students. Have the green boxes been used in those?
I actually don't know. Right now, we're having a dialogue about how to expand the Green Boxes program. It is, like I said, it's free, so it's fully funded through donations and through foundation grants. And one thing, for example, we've talked about was expanding to the Girl Scouts, because the Girl Scouts now have all these STEM badges, and we said, wouldn't it be great to use this, to have the Green Boxes connect with a Girl Scout badge or something like that? So we're talking about, we've had conversations about moving them into that informal space. I just don't think we're quite there yet.
Lake Tahoe is really beautiful in the summer.
Yes, it is. It's pretty great in the winter, too. Yeah.
I think it's interesting, the evolution of trust for, well, basically for a lot of things in our society, but the evolution of trust for scientists. Do you trust scientists? Do you trust your doctor anymore, or do you go online to figure out? Do you trust your...
Yeah.
You don't trust politicians, obviously, anymore. But when you look at this notion of trust and science, and then for a large portion of the population, for example, climate change, just to segue from what he said, you have this notion that one scientist says it's absolutely, the climate is absolutely changing, and another noted scientist says it ain't changing. It's been this way all the time. So that when one looks to trust science, and again, the broader issue of trust, how do you reconcile that? Because I suppose empirically they're each doing their work, and they're each coming up with a different conclusion using probably different assumptions and different tests and all that. But I think it's interesting when you look at that issue.
I think your point is perfect. It's right on, because this to me goes to not just Science Literacy 101, but it's more the 202 version.
Yeah.
And science is a discourse, and it's always been consensus-based. So gravity is a theory. It is not a law, right? But I'll tell you, I'm not going to go up to the top of this building, jump off just because it's a theory, and there are a couple people that say gravity, that are contrarians. And teaching about the science process, and that it is deliberative and it takes time to generate consensus, but once there is consensus, that's pretty doggone good. That's part of talking about science and the science process. You very seldom have any scientist or group of scientists that will say something is 100% certain, yet we operate as a society in black and white, left and right, up and down. And that is, I think, part of the challenge that we have to deal with. I think also with these really political issues, and when I say political, they're just issues that are innately important. Again, hydraulic fracturing, coming from Colorado, is a big issue. Climate change, even evolution to some extent. There are scientific arguments playing out in the editorial pages of the Washington Post and the New York Times, whereas as scientists, we're used to this, and as a public, we're used to that playing out in science, and they emerge with some consensus statement. So again, this is part of that renaissance of science and society, and where do we all play a role? Because I do believe community input is important. Not necessarily, you leave it to the experts, but at the same time, in terms of framing how the decisions might be made, or where the science needs to go in order to help move society forward, I think the community plays a tremendous part.
Is there one last question out there, maybe a student that has one?
All in the back. All
Well,
right.
I thank you so much,
Thanks.
Dr. Averyt. We're so happy to listen to you. And thank you to all of you for coming and listening. I implore you to go forth and talk about science, listen to people talk about science, and for God's sake, Google a living scientist on Google tonight and learn their names. So have a nice lunch and thank you for being here.